That old German house documentary by creepypastas. I have always loved visiting my grandmother's house in Munich. We would always have the greatest times there playing chess and such. Even though she would always beat me. The only thing I didn't like about her house was her German puppet room. I guess it was her hobby, but I couldn't see why anyone would want things that were that creepy in the house. If that wasn't bad enough, the guest room I slept in was right next to the room. I would sleep on her couch, but it's too bumpy and rough. It would not be good for my fragile back, so I had no choice but to sleep in the guest room. When nighttime came, my painful fear would keep me up at night. I could have sworn that I heard talking in the puppet room and somewhat maniacal laughter. I would have reported this to my grandmother, but I was almost 18 and it would seem silly and ignorant. Hearing these noises for 8 days straight compelled me to tell my grandmother. She said that I was hearing things and that it's probably the neighbors since she lived in a highly populated area. After she told me that, I concluded that she is probably right and I have nothing to be afraid about. The final day at my grandmother's house before I left, my cousin, who lived right down the block, came over to say hi. We watched many movies off Netflix and played some games to keep us occupied. After about 7 hours he asked where the bathroom was. My grandmother said go down the hall and take a left. That's what he did, but somehow he went down the wrong hallway and ended up in the puppet room. 8 minutes passed and I was getting worried, so I went off looking for him. Eventually I ended up in the puppet room as well. I didn't find anything, but a puppet that was even scarier than the others. I picked it up from beside my feet and examined it carefully. Leaving the room, I approached my grandmother with the puppet and asked her where she got this one. She said that she had never seen it in her life and to just throw it on the table for the time being. She then asked me about my cousin and I said that he must have left. I sank into the couch and began watching more movies. 2 hours into the movie my grandmother jumped out of the couch with a face of true horror. What I saw is something I will never forget. I saw nothing on the table. We both panicked and nearly passed out. My body dashed to the phone to dial the police when I noticed something clamping onto my leg. It was the puppet with bright red eyes. He seemed to be trying to mimic words. Both I and my grandmother screamed out loud with an ear-shattering frequency. I swung my foot at the beast and it flew to the other side of the room. I then ran to the door and flew out of the house. My grandmother slipped while running and hit her head on the counter, I assume. The many neighbors heard our screeching and went out of the houses. What they came to find was my grandmother in a pool of her own blood with a gash in her head. Someone called the paramedics and they helped her to the hospital. Days later, while I was in the hospital with my grandmother apologizing for not going back to help her, she told me she was moving out of the house and burning all her puppets. After she was treated, we bravely traveled back to the house, grabbed all the puppets and burned them in a bonfire. My grandmother was shaking as she saw the puppets burn. It seemed as if I only saw life in the puppets as they were burning. 1 year later, when she had already sold her house, I got word that a couple moved in. Little did we know that the puppet that attacked us was still in the house and had attacked the couple. Supposedly the wife found the puppet moaning, "Help me." The wife took a kitchen knife and cut the puppet to bits. The husband had to deal with his wife's fear after this happened. The husband told the wife that nothing happened to her.